Welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Erik. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. Will Ward asked me a question. He asked me if prison guards ever beat up inmates. And the short answer to that is yes, they do. But I'm going to talk some more about this, because in Kansas, guards are considered LEOs, and so I'm also going to talk about police officers. I'm going to talk about cops and people in law enforcement and my experience with that. Because guards beat up inmates all the time. In prison, it becomes a normal thing, and while I could tell you guys a lot of stories about guards beating up inmates, it just happens so often. I could create a whole other channel just based off that. So we're going to talk about, policing, guards, my opinions on it. And this is something that challenges me because my views have kind of evolved over time. This is something that has challenged my own personal views, and I've had to make revisions in my own views about this. We're also going to talk about conflict de-escalation, and we'll get into that later, but we're going to get into this, so like and subscribe if you want to. Let's talk about it. So I said that the occurrence of officers beating up inmates in prison is too numerous to go into a bunch of stories about. Although I do have a lot of stories about that. It happens a lot. Let's just say that, okay? A couple of things you should be aware of is that, one, officers don't always beat up inmates unprovoked. Sometimes inmates are doing things, they're clearly in the wrong. They're clearly jeopardizing the safety and well-being of others around them, other inmates, other guards, etc. If there's a fight going on, officer is going to run in there, he's going to break that up, and he's probably not going to worry if he hurts anybody in the process of breaking that up. If I'm trying to break somebody's face and an officer jumps on me, he's not worried about hurting me. He's worried about getting me to stop. All right? That's not an unprovoked beating. Now, if I'm just kind of running my mouth or talking slick to a guard and then he gets his buddies and they beat me up, that's a different story. And that happens a lot too. But there's two extremes. And our goal here is not to pick one or the other, like saying that all officer on inmate violence is justified. That's an extreme. We want to stay away from that. We also want to stay away from the extreme where we say no officer on inmate violence is justified. Sometimes to end a conflict, you have to use force. I mean, sadly, that's the way it is. But some people, you can't talk to them, and some situations don't call for talking. There's a big riot, if there's knives out, if something big's going on, talking ain't going to get that job done. Being soft ain't going to get that job done. But let's talk not just about guards, but let's talk about law enforcement officers in general. And this is where I'm going to start talking about some controversial stuff, and you might disagree with me, you might agree with me, but that's the beauty of it. Y'all don't have to agree with me about everything. You're free to have a difference of opinion. These are my opinions. I've been around a lot of prison guards. I've been around a lot of police officers. These are my opinions, and they have changed over the years. In a previous video, you all heard me say, I really don't like cops. And this is a view that I've had a lot of problems with, because I've met cops that were good people, They weren't bad guys at all. And they've actually helped me and other people. And that challenges my views. And at some point when it is challenged enough repeatedly, I have to start revising my views. And then I have to start breaking down the components of this. So at the end of the day, something that I believe in is that we're all people. I don't care if you're an inmate, a career criminal. I don't care if you're a cop. I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, from the United States, from the UK, from Africa, Middle East, China, whatever. Okay? We're all people. Social class, skin color, what language you speak, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're all people. Something that you should know about people is that we're flawed. Okay? People screw up. People commit crimes. Cops are people. They're flawed. All right? There's a problem when I make generalizations. We go back to talking about extremes. There's a problem with saying all cops are bad. Just like there's a problem with saying all criminals are bad or all inmates are bad. Because I know that last part isn't true. I've met a lot of people in prison that were good people. They did some really stupid things, but they were good people. And they had to face the consequences for that. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been in prison. There's consequences to action. But there are good people in prison. So that generalization would be wrong. Well, the same logic can be applied to police officers, prison guards, etc. People commit crimes, and if a police officer or a prison guard beats up a person without any justification, if they are excessive and without reason, they assault someone, or they hurt someone, or heaven forbid they kill someone, that's a crime. Well, guess what? There are cops that commit crimes because they're people. People are flawed, and people screw up. All right? That said, I can also reverse that same logic where I was talking about there are people in prison that were good. I can say that there are people in the law enforcement community that are good. I have met them. You know, there are police officers and prison guards that have made a difference in people's lives, that tried to steer them in the right direction. And they're in a very good position to do that. Because just like when I was in prison, I saw people when they were at their lowest point, right? I was locked up in there with them. Well, guess who else sees those people? Police officers and prison guards. They see those people at the lowest point in their lives, many times. There are a lot of things that lead up to the commission of a crime, usually. Usually it doesn't just happen in a heartbeat. Usually someone is in a bad place before they commit a crime. There's a context in which that crime takes place. People who are hurting tend to hurt others, right? That's not an absolute rule, but, you know, it happens. So when a person finds himself in the back of a cop car and their life has been falling apart for a long time, and then that night everything just came to a head and they got caught. That cop has a person there when they're vulnerable, and they might be at a point where they're finally willing to listen to somebody. And there are some cops that will take advantage of that. And that's a good thing, okay? You know, I'm not trying to paint this in extremes. Not all cops are good. You know, not all cops are going to use that opportunity to do something good. But not all people are going to use that opportunity to do something good, right? If we just break it down, if we remove the word cop and we replace it with person, if we remove the word cops and replace it with the word people, not all people would do something good in that situation. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. If I beat someone up, if I'm in the wrong, if I just beat the hell out of somebody, I'm going to be charged with it. And there's going to be consequences for my actions. And the accountability for law enforcement officers and corrections officers in most cases is very, very inadequate. The accountability just isn't there. You know, they might be demoted. They might be transferred, they might be suspended, but they're not going to be charged with a crime most of the time. And that's the problem. When we talk about stuff like, all cops are bad or defunding the police force and stuff like that, personally, if I had an opinion, if I had a voice to use in the matter, if people really gave a shit about what I thought about the subject, I would probably share it more often. This would be my position. Not all cops are bad, and we shouldn't defund the police force. If anything, they need better training. I don't think they need better weapons. I don't think they necessarily need better equipment. What I'm talking about are the weapons that you can't see. See, when you're breaking up an altercation or when you're approaching someone who's in trouble for something, whether they're a suspect in a domestic thing or whether they're an inmate and, you suspect that they have a weapon on them, or you want to know what they're doing, if they're out of their cell and they're not supposed to be, or, they broke a rule, whatever. The most effective way to go about that has nothing to do with the badge and the radio. Your most effective tools in that situation, personally, I can say from my experience dealing with officers, what gets through to me more than anything else is a person's attitude and their demeanor. If someone approaches me in a disarming manner and they talk to me like a human being on my level, and they're not trying to be an asshole, they're trying to speak to me in an intelligent, rational way, in a controlled manner, I'll talk to you. I will reason with you. Hell, I might let you put me in handcuffs. But it's hard to be combative towards a nice person. It's hard to be combative towards a person who's being very disarming, if that makes sense. It's hard to be mad at a person that ain't mad at you. The greatest tools for police officers, prison guards, is having that disarming attitude and demeanor. Professional and controlled, no doubt. But that doesn't mean you have to be an asshole. You can treat people like people. And using tools like conflict de-escalation will get you a lot farther than a bad attitude and a big mouth that will escalate the situation. I can tell you, whether you wear a badge, radio, or if you're another inmate, if you come at me and you're talking tough and you're getting in my face and you're yelling at me, I'm gonna smack you right in your apple shiner. That's just how it is. I don't like being disrespected. I ain't gonna disrespect you. Don't disrespect me. So, in a previous video, I said I didn't really like cops. And a lot of that has to do with I was raised to not like cops. Both of my parents were retired criminals. And then when I was 17, I went to prison and spent, a lot of my adult life there. And you're not supposed to like cops in prison. There's a us and them mentality. But the problem with that is the people on both sides are people. They're people. Cops are trying to do a job. The guards, which I call them cops, and the inmates are trying to live their lives, do their time. Everything works a lot smoother when you realize that people are just people. We don't have to be enemies. Now, that doesn't mean that when you ask me to rat on someone, I ain't going to do that. But I'm going to tell you I ain't going to do that. I'm not going to insult you. I'm going to let you know where the boundaries are. I'm not telling on my friends. I'm not giving you any information to make somebody's life miserable. I'm not doing that. But I'm not going to disrespect you either. At the end of the day, those guys are working a job. They're trying to make a living. And a lot of them are trying to do something positive for their communities. But what about officers that escalate situations? What about the officers that come at people with crazy attitudes, who are very combative, and who go about it all the wrong way? What about those officers that use violence when it's not justified? My take on that is those officers should never be officers, and they should be held to a greater degree of accountability than your average person, because they have a very great responsibility. You know, they have a lot of power, they have weapons, people's welfare have been placed into their hands. So I feel like they should have a greater degree of accountability. But the officers who come at you crazy, they create more problems than they solve. And they create problems not just for inmates, but they create problems for their fellow officers. An officer with a big mouth and a bad attitude can create a riot. That's a thing. And people die in riots. There have been instances in Kansas that I could talk about where, you know, one officer was being a prick. He was running his mouth. He was insulting people. He was disrespecting people. And some inmates got tired of it. And they figured that they were going to jump him when he came to work the next day. Well, the next day, the inmates jumped the wrong cop and they killed him. An officer who was completely innocent got killed because another officer had a bad attitude and a big mouth and a horrible demeanor. I'm not saying that that was justified on the inmate's part, but that officer instigated a situation that took the life of one of his fellow officers. That is a problem. That is a real thing. So those guys, I don't think they should ever have a badge. I don't think they should work in a corrections environment, period. That's a dangerous environment. It has the potential to be deadly. And if you're creating situations or contributing to situations in that environment, you're failing. And I don't think you should be there. You're putting people's lives at risk. Choose a different job. So, that's my take on it. If you don't like it, well, that's cool. You don't have to agree with me, but I appreciate you watching. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will catch you all later.